I'm starting this before my birth because I think that's interesting to know. My parents were married about a year before I was born. And I didn't discover that really till I was looking through some papers. It's not critical. And I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and in a hospital there, and the hospital bill was $53 for 4 days, and all the services, can you imagine, for $53? That's really history. Okay, so I get born in St. Vincent's Hospital in Kansas City on June the 1st, 1928. At that point, my parents had their own house, and we lived there until I was a first grader. My dad lost his job. With his job gone, we were lucky enough to be able to move in with my Uncle Carl and Aunt Ruth Johnson. Aunt Ruth was my mother's sister. My recollection of my father is that I never got to spend a lot of time with him since I was in the first grade when he died, and he was 46 at that time. I looked that up anyway. But I can remember at one time we were living with Ruth and Carl. I covered that earlier. And there was down near Leeds. Leeds was a Chevrolet factory where my Uncle Carl worked. And there was a big creek behind us with steep banks. And I convinced my dad that he ought to dig a cave in that bank. So I forget why I wanted to do it, but anyway, he did it for me. And I was so pleased that he did that. He was John Franklin Zumwalt, was his name. And he lived in Levacy, Missouri. He had 6 or 7 brothers and sisters. And that was a farm, kept going down there. What I remember at his funeral, pretty well attended, if that makes any difference, but anyway, this lady came up to me and said, well, your father's gone now, you be the man of the house, you look after your mother. And I thought, that's a hell of a thing to tell a 6-year-old kid. And I remember that to this day. I guess all I could do is be obedient and not be a nuisance to her, and I tried to do that. After my Aunt Ruth was pregnant with Carl Johnson, they decided that, and it's a wise move, that I should move down and live with my grandmother Whipple in Lebanon, Missouri. And by then I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, I've forgotten. Living with Grandma Whipple were 3 of my aunts and uncles, or maybe 4. And the youngest one was just a year older than I. But the Whipple family, my mother being the oldest of 13, I had lots of aunts and uncles there. And so many of them helped me. That went on while my mother was living in Kansas City and going to the chiropractic school. And finally one time I persuaded her to, so I could be with her during the 5th grade, and we lived in a nice little apartment near Hatcher Elementary. That's probably the most enjoyable year I had in school, that I had that year with her. Things were kind of tough at that time, money-wise. I remember the big occasion. That Christmas I was given a pair of slippers. That was it. From her, that's all she could afford. And I've forgotten what I gave her, probably something I made in school. But anyway, times were tough, and after that year was up, then I went back down to live with Grandma Whipple. My mother opened a chiropractor's office in Lebanon, Missouri. She stayed there and until her arthritis was so bad that she could not operate as a chiropractic doctor. Then an old classmate of her from Cleveland Chiropractic College in Kansas City came to Lebanon and opened a practice as a chiropractor. Then she went to work for him, not as a chiropractor, but still in chiropractic, so to speak. Well, while she was working for him, she began attending the Catholic Church and became Catholic. And that surprised everyone in our family because there were no Catholics until she became a Catholic. Then when I was in college, she decided she was going to become a nun, which is kind of unusual, but possible, since she was a widow of many years. So she went to Springfield to a convent there. We were able to go down there as often as we could, no more than once or twice a month. And they entertained us. We didn't actually go in we were in an outer room, and there was a wooden screen between my mother and whoever was on the other side, and that always depressed me. She could stick a finger through and we could touch fingers. And then years later, Pope, oh God, I've forgotten which Pope, liberalized that, and they took the screen away entirely. But anyway, that made it very much more pleasant to visit with her. And we could even have lunch with her. They would permit that there. And I said to my mother, a nun, I said, Mom, I've heard it's all right to kiss a nun, but don't get into the habit. And she laughed too. So there I was, and got into Lebanon High School. Didn't participate in any sports there. I early on got an early morning paper route, so I'd get up about 4:30 in the morning to deliver newspapers. One of the questions that has been asked at one time, did I have any dates while I was in school? And the truth is I didn't. Not in high school. Well, I tried to have one, and she so resoundingly said no. I said, this isn't for me. I didn't try again until I got to college. Well, I had no money saved. Couldn't get to college. So I joined the Marines. Why the Marines? Well, Fort Leonard Wood, the Army fort, was nearby, and I didn't want to be a soldier. And of course, the Marines had a fabulous uniform. So there I go off to boot camp. Parris Island, South Carolina. 8 weeks of living hell. 1946. I enlisted the Marine Air Corps for 2 years, knowing that I could receive the GI Bill, which I would need to go to college. So that didn't work out too hot. They sent me to Cherry Point, Marine Air Base. I was there a few weeks, then decided to send me to Quantico, where they had the Marine Air Mechanics School. There's a better name for it than that, but anyway, they taught me essentially to be a grease monkey, not much mechanics, but how to maintain the planes. From that, they sent me back to Cherry Point to do that. Well, I didn't do that at Cherry Point because unfortunately they didn't have enough money to pay for the fuel to fly the airplanes there. So I had guard duty, mess duty, a few unpleasant duties. And one day the first sergeant said, anybody that wants to get a convenience of the government discharge, lay up to the company office. Squadron office, I guess it was. And the word discharge was very welcome for me because I felt it was a lousy situation I was in. So I went up there and I got an honorable discharge after almost a year, only a year of service in the Marine Air Corps. Then I went back to Lebanon, where I'd been living, and spent 2 or 3 months on some sort of aid that they gave people who were still looking for a job, servicemen. And I was advised by the superintendent of schools there in Lebanon, Frank Haggerty was superintendent, and we became sort of pals, if you could say it that way. And he advised me to go to the University of Missouri instead of the Teachers College in Springfield. He said, once you go to, you might as well go to the university, because if you want a master's degree, you'll have to go there to get it. So I followed his advice and went to university, hitchhiked up there. I was walking around town looking on the campus. Then about 6 or 7 at night, the police car stopped and said, "What are you doing, son?" I said, "Well, I just got up here and I'm going to enroll." And I was seeing what the town was like. And he said, "Where are you staying?" "Well, I haven't." He said, "Well, hop in." So I got in the police car. These two officers drove me around in it till maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So they said, "Well, if you haven't got a place to stay, come on." So they took me to jail and opened the cell, and I spent my first night in Columbia in jail. So I moved to Columbia, and on the GI Bill, I think I was getting $52 a month, which was enough to live on. And I also got a part-time job. So there I held forth and got to be a teacher, lifetime situation, and teacher of social studies and English, which I had majored in social studies and minored in English. Thank God I didn't have to teach English. After graduation, then I had the responsibility to go to basic school. That's essentially the basic school for Marine officers. The prior 2 summers to my graduation from college, I'd gone to Quantico for 6-week sessions, which took the place of officers candidate school that most people would have had before they went to basic school. From there, I went to Camp Pendleton for a few weeks, and I had cold weather training. And then I went to Korea, and ended up in the 3rd Battalion, the 7th Marine Regiment. That was an infantry regiment, which I was not all that thrilled with, because I hoped to do something else, but the Marine Corps has no say in it. So I made the best of that. I had a rifle platoon. I think there were about 36 enlisted, and I was responsible for a couple of months. And luckily, our position on the line in Korea was pretty much fixed. There was a neutral zone between North Korea and South Korea, and both sides were lined up in their positions, and they'd send out patrols and we'd send out patrols. So most of the people were injured or died, stepped on a mine. Very few were shot. And as I look back on it, it was a worthless time for the country and the people that are serving there, because nothing was gained. So I had this rifle platoon for a while. Then the battalion commander called me in. He said, "Zumwalt, you're a new supply officer." I said, "Sir, I don't know a thing about supplies." He said, "That's all right. You've got a good master sergeant there. All you have to do is sign the papers." So I did that for a month or so, and it was true. It was a very good duty. Then a supply officer came in. Well, he had a trained officer. What are they going to do with me? So they decided I would be the battalion motor transport officer. They may have done that because if they looked at my records, they'd seen I had auto mechanics in high school. I'm not sure. And I welcomed that assignment, because I had my own Jeep, and we did busy things, good things, all the time. So then almost after total service of almost a year in Korea, I was rotated automatically back to the States. And since I did not want to continue my service in the Marine Corps, they gave me an honorable discharge. So I met a guy at Quantico in a summer training class the year before. He was a math teacher in Damascus, Maryland. He said, if you ever want to come out here, let me know. And I had his name and address, or his phone number, and I called him. He sent me an application form to teach in Montgomery County Public Schools. One page, printed on both sides as I recall. But anyway, I sent that in, and I guess as soon as he got it, or soon thereafter, he called me and said, we want you here as soon as you can be. I said, well, that's great. But that summer I was attending a 12-week course for Marine Reserve officers to be an intelligence officer, which is what I had hoped for when I became an infantry officer. So I went to that school, and that summer I had that school over there in Baltimore Harbor, and I could come back to Montgomery County and find this place for us to live. So I taught school for 30 years in Montgomery County, excepting I had 2 years of active duty in the Quantico during the Vietnam situation. I guess you'd call it a war. Somebody from headquarters of the Marine Corps called and said, would you like to be the training aids officer down at Quantico? I said, I don't know what a training aids officer is. Then he told me what the responsibilities were: to be commanding a group of about 40 Marine enlisted, and I had an assistant training officer, happened to be, when I got there, a lady Marine. And they said, we'll give you a 2 months order, because that's between school years, and if you like it, we'll extend it for 2 years, from the 2 months to 2 years. And said, if you don't like it, well then you don't need to come back, we'll tell you. So I tried that. I liked it very much. It's probably the best job I ever had in my life. Then as time ran out for it, they gave me the choice. I could go to the war zone. I said, no, I will not do that. I've got 5 kids at home, and I didn't think that would be fair, and of course I had some qualms about not going to. Was that fair? People often ask me the name Zumwalt, are you kin to Elmo Zumwalt? I said, I'm Orlow Zumwalt. But in fact, going way back, we would be 3rd or 4th or 5th cousins. And I met him in the restroom at the airport.
Oh. And
I knew him, but he didn't know me. And I didn't strike up the conversation as we were doing our thing, but anyway, after we left, I told him that I was a Zumwalt too, and he was very gracious about that. And he said, I'll see you over there. And I felt like saying, not if I can help it. But I didn't. Over the years, we stayed in touch. And finally, when I was selected for promotion to colonel, skipping captain, major, lieutenant colonel, for colonel, I wrote and asked the admiral if he would conduct the promotion ceremonies. And he would, and so all of us piled into our station wagon, went down to headquarters Marine Corps. Zumwalt gave me, and all the family were there, all the 5 kids, and we have some nice photographs of that. A very memorable thing. I was feeling a little different that day, and I said to the admiral, I said, Admiral, has anyone ever asked you if you're related to Colonel Zumwalt? And we both laughed. I yelled at that. So there we go. I retired from the school system, and interestingly enough, upon my retirement from the school system, I was better paid than when I was teaching school full-time, because I had teacher's retirement, social security, and military retirement. So I've been very lucky in that respect, and in many other respects, of course. Well, the first car was really an amazing thing, because I would hitchhike back and forth to Lebanon, and if I couldn't make it every week, I would mail my laundry to my mother, and she'd mail it clean back to me. At that time, postage rates permitted that. Yeah, it was. But the first car I owned was a Model A Ford. It's the one that succeeded the Model T Ford. And it was a coupe and had a rumble seat. And that was fascinating to me. And I could buy it for $200, which was a lot of money then, but still I was able to buy it. And it was painted gray, navy, like surplus war paint, and that's what it was painted with. And it was a great car. Probably the dumbest transaction I ever made was selling that car. I would give $10,000 for today. I'd go to Medley's drugstore. Raymond Medley Jr. was a friend in high school, not a good friend, but an acquaintance maybe. We'd go up there at Medley's drugstore, and Geraldine West, called Jerry, worked in the soda fountain. And I saw her there, and some guy said, I bet you could get a date with her. And so I summoned up courage. Remember me telling you the first time many years before that. And yes, we had a date, and then, but anyway, we went together, and finally got to the point where we wanted to get married. Well, how? We didn't want it known publicly. So Gene England, the friend I spoke of earlier, drove us to Mountain Home, Arkansas. People could show up there, get married just like that. Nobody would know. You didn't have to wait 20 minutes. So I had to wake up the county recorder, who it was that issued marriage licenses. I've forgotten now, somebody in the county government. And he did that for me and complained. I gave him $10 or $15 for it.
Was it in the middle of the night?
Yeah, it's 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And then where are you going to find somebody to marry you then? And this clerk said, well, he gave me the name of the guy. He says he's generally hanging around the courthouse there. Oh, he was the one that had to do the marrying. And we found him. He was down in the basement of the courthouse. He'd sort of set up an office next to the men's toilet. Really wonderful situation. I forget where we went for the marriage ceremony. He married us. It was all legal. We had a piece of paper saying it was legal. So we go back to Lebanon. Didn't tell anybody. And for the longest time, months later, I forget how the word got out that we were married. I said I recognized that she was a better wife than I was a husband. And it wasn't just so much alarming. She fulfilled her role better than I fulfilled mine. And well, I remember that when I was out at Fort Holabird, so she drove with 3 kids in that station wagon from Missouri to Maryland, which I thought was a tremendous thing for her to do when I'd done it. And I don't know that she ever drove any place further than Springfield. And to set out on a 1,000-mile trip, I was so amazed and appreciated it. Well, my life has been a strange thing at times, I must admit. But
Makes it interesting.
So grateful for how fate and fortune and good luck and God's graces kept me going. Janine was the last one born in Missouri, so we had Kurt next, and then Elise.
Elise in 61.
All 5 kids now. And each of the girls were named, I'm told, arbitrarily by me. We had a Marta, Name of a song, Martha, Rambling Rose of the Wildwood, Janine, Janine, I dream of lilac time. At least, I can't sing that. Each of them had a song, were named after a song. And the boys, I'm not sure, because one summer on reserve training, was over where the records are stored nationally. Marine officer there declassifying many of the records. And some of the records listed all the personnel in the German submarine service. And it wasn't Eric, but maybe the word Kurt came from there.
The Dietrich came from
Kurt
there.
Dietrich, yeah. And everybody was happy with her name, I'm sure.
Yeah, Eric especially with the R.
Oh yeah, the R. They named me after a friend of my dad's named Eric Reed Coughlin. Well, when they got set to name me, they knew Orlow, but they didn't know his middle name, so they just gave him the letter R as a middle name. And that's been a damn mess all my life. As time grew on, time went on, the name Orlow is less and less enchanting for me. And I've tried to tell and taught most of the people to call me Zum, the first syllable of my last name. I like that. I was anticipating somebody raising a question of what I was most proud of. And maybe you did, maybe I didn't catch it. But what I was most proud of is, of course, my parents and relatives, well, how they treated me. Most proud of my two wives and how they treated me and treat me. And especially my kids, because I say laughing now when people ask me about my kids, I say, well, they're not on drugs, they're not in jail, so I guess I succeeded. Well, that's a simplification greatly. I think I'm very proud of my kids. Very proud. And my grandkids too. And now great grandkids, so I guess that's probably where it'll end. I can't imagine greater in my span, my lifespan. In the last 3 years I had shingles, still got the remnants of that. Then I had a minor stroke, I forget the long term for that. Then I had pneumonia.
Yeah.
But otherwise, very healthy. None of those things are, you know, you can pass through them, and I did. Or they passed through me, as the case may be.
Yeah.
I thank you for your entertainment, or me entertaining you, as the case may be. Isn't that enough?
Yeah.
Oh, now I remember. When I was stationed at Quantico, I went into the District of Columbia on the weekends usually, take the train up, and I went to Arthur Murray's studio. I didn't have any money to speak of, and I said I'd like to learn to dance, and we talked a while, and usually they try to sell you a lot of dance lessons, you know. And I explained that I didn't really have much money and couldn't get much money. And as I recall, they let me take, there's about 5 or 6 dance lessons, which covered the basics. And after that, I didn't use the dance lessons, you know. I was too embarrassed. I didn't have any dance partners. I wouldn't go to dances, so I didn't have any dance partners, yeah.